Now let's build our checkout item component. Now our checkout item component is going to use the cart items that we have stored in our state. Very similar to how we pull them into our cart dropdown, we're going to pull them into our checkout page and then populate that dropdown. Or not dropdown, but that list of checkout items that we see in our final. So let's actually build this component. Now let's go into our application, go to our checkout page, and right here is where we're going to map out our checkout item. So let's build the component. Let's go to our component folder and make a new one called checkout item. And inside, we need our usual checkout item.component.jsx, as well as our styles page. Checkout item.styles.sass. Now, inside of our component, we got to import React from React and import in our style sheet. Now, as usual, I've included the style sheet for you under your resources, and you're just going to copy it and put it inside of your style sheet. Now, the main thing to note is that the width of these three categories is the same as the width of the three headers or the four headers that we have. The only difference is that there's a container for the actual image and the image itself sits inside. And we'll see what that looks like in terms of how we're laying it out in the HTML, but that's how we're able to align them together. So what we're going to do is we're going to declare our const checkout item. And it's going to be a functional component that returns this div with the class name of checkout item. And then inside, we're going to have that image container I was telling you about, which will just be a div with the class name of image container. And then inside of that, we're going to have our image. Now, the reason why we use a container for our image is because it's easier for us to control the size of this section that holds our image. We can throw some padding on it, right? And then give it that width, and then have our image inside be constrained by it. And by constrained, I just mean that we set the width and height based off of what the size of this container is, and we can apply the padding here without having to affect the other sections, because maybe we don't want the same kind of padding on those. It's just easier to put the image that we have inside of this container. Now, we're going to provide the alt key of item. And this is just for those screen readers, because when people who have disabilities that use a screen reader for the browser, whenever they hit an image, they can't actually see the image. So they get read out what that description will be. And for us, it'll just be item. It's just easier for us to say, if they know that it's an image and then they know item, by the point that they actually use the screen reader, they know the item name, so they don't really need to have a full understanding, perhaps, of what the image will be. Next, we're going to add our spans. And here is where we're going to use name. And then let's just repeat this for the respective quantity, price, and then the last one, this will not be a span, sorry, it'll actually be a div, because this is what's going to hold our remove button. Now, our remove button is going to be a UTF-8 wingding. Now, you can actually find a good list of them right here at this W3 Schools link that I'm going to put on your screen right now. Now, what UTF-8 is, it's essentially a standard that most browsers have that represents what characters they're able to display or they're able to recognize, right? So all the letters that we type that we're most familiar with, those all fall into the UTF-8 categorization. But there are also these other additional symbols that we can render, right? That our browser knows what they represent. And we're just going to use this X for our X. And the reason for it is because it's more balanced, right? It's essentially like an icon that our browser is naturally aware of. So in order for us to use it, we can just copy this text, right? In fact, if you hit try it, you'll see where it's demonstrated. We have to apply this ampersand hashtag before we actually use the number, and then we got to put a semicolon, right? And that's that same number. So inside of here, we're just going to put this here, And then we're actually going to pass in our props. Now, we know that we're going to use the cart items that we have in our store. But we're also going to pass in the full item. And the reason why we want to pass in the full item rather than spread the props into our components, as we would any other way, is because we know that we eventually want to increase and decrease this quantity, as well as hit the remove to remove all of the items that are in the store regarding this cart item. Now, passing the full item is mandatory because we know with our cart items, when we wrote our cart action add item, we needed the whole item in order for it to work. So if we want to toggle and increase the quantity, we're pretty much just firing our add item call. But this time we also want it to be done inside of this component. So we just got to follow the same requirements as our add item action creator. So inside of our checkout item, we're just going to make sure to pass the whole item as a prop as well. But we can just destructure off the other values that we need in order to apply them into the component. So we're going to need name, we're going to need image URL, we're going to need price, and we're going to need quantity. Now that we have our values inside of our image, we're just going to set the source equal to the image URL. As for the name, we're just going to render the name. Same thing with quantity and price. And then let's just export this out as the default and bring it into our checkout page component. And here we'll just import it in. Checkout item component. And then instead of rendering this cart item name, we'll just render out our checkout item and pass cart item in as a prop. We'll also make sure to set our key equal to our cart item ID. And now if we save, go back to our application, add some items, and go to our checkout, we'll see that we have our component. Now, before we continue with building in the remove feature as well as decreasing and increasing the quantity, let's just commit our code. So let's go back to our terminal and let's check what we've added. So we've done our checkout page and we'll say added checkout page, checkout item component, and updated cart to use selectors from reselect. And now let's push it up and build our checkout item functionality.